So what were some of the first business systems you remember setting up in those early days for your team? Was it all paper in the beginning, just pushing it, everything's written down on a scratch pad? What did that look like originally?
Yeah, I mean, I started on the line and figured I'd have to spend quite a bit of time there before I started managing, but the needs of the business grew so fast that I got thrown in the deep end. So I didn't even know how to run Excel. There was an Excel instruction booklet on a shelf in the office. I remember seeing it, and I just said, I'm going to read this. And ended up just teaching myself Excel. And then from there, like many businesses, ran many organizational tools off Excel for a long time. In about the last 5 years of the business, we did implement some ERP, some MRP software to help try and move us away from those tools.
Welcome to the Systems Edge. I'm David Stowers, your host, and this is a show where we talk about operations and not just operational excellence, but we talk about some of the things that don't work in operations and the problems that people have, and we try to jump into the deep end of the pool as much as we can and find solutions. And we're a big believer that a rising tide lifts all ships. So today we're going to grab some nuggets from our guest, Zach Fitzgerald of Bakeworks. Zach, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Why don't you just start off like we always do, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and Bakeworks. Maybe not the LinkedIn version, what a typical day looks like for you, how you got to where you're at, and just some interesting tidbits of background information on yourself and the company.
Sure. Yeah. Bakeworks is a natural snack food manufacturing company. It really started as a very small cookie company. So it was a family business that my dad started back in the late 90s. He started the business with no baking or business background. So kind of jumped off the deep end and built the parachute mid-flight. And so it was always very entrepreneurial business. He used to drive around the region here in Washington and sell cookies out of the back of his van, and I ended up growing a business to about $500,000 in revenue every year. And then directly after high school, instead of going to college, I just jumped into the business with him. Figured
Okay.
I'd help out for a couple years. Ended up staying about 20, and we grew from a manufacturing operation that produced 3 of our own brands. We switched the model over to contract manufacturing for brands all over the United States. So grew it to low 8 figures in revenue, and learned a lot on the way.
That's awesome. Good for you. Good for you. So what's a typical day look like for you?
I mean, it used to be in the early days, it was, 12 to 20-hour days. There were points where big orders would come in, and I would have a cot set up in my office to get product made overnight with the team. But in recent years, it's really been a pretty calm existence. I've about a 10-minute commute to the facility. So kind of a little more spoiled these days with a team that we built up over time.
Yeah, it's exciting in those early days. I know I've been an entrepreneur myself over the years, and I can appreciate what you just said. Until you get your systems in place, you're the chief cook and bottle washer, as they say. And you got to, and even if you weren't, even if you had a team, you want to be there because you got to make sure those first few orders get out the door right. So, what were some of the first business systems you remember setting up in those early days for your team? Was it all paper in the beginning, just pushing it, everything's written down on a scratch pad? What did that look like originally?
Yeah, I mean, I started on the line and figured I'd have to spend quite a bit of time there before I started managing, but the needs of the business grew so fast that I got thrown in the deep end. So I didn't even know how to run Excel. There was an Excel instruction booklet on a shelf in the office. I remember seeing it, and I just said, I'm going to read this, and ended up just teaching myself Excel. And then from there, like many businesses, ran many organizational tools off Excel for a long time. In about the last 5 years of the business, we did implement some ERP, some MRP software to help try and move us away from those tools.
How far along were you those tools started to be something you reached out for to put those in place? Were you $1 million in? Were you, a year in? How many employees? Like, what were the some stats around those systems that you're at least on the back end that made you say, "Yeah, we're at that point." Because a lot of people don't ever make the jump. I mean, they're still running on Excel in some
Yeah.
cases with big companies.
Yeah. I talked to a lot of people in my network running bigger companies than Bakeworks, and they're still on spreadsheets. So, I have a client who's doing about 30 million a year, and they're just now implementing, and I'm helping them implement a ERP. But we were probably doing between 5 and 6 million a year,
Okay.
and decided to make that investment. The first time implementing that kind of software is full of mistakes, trying to get too granular with your data too fast.
Yes.
And then transitioning people and training them is just a huge piece of that whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How many employees did you have to, uh I almost wanna say get on board because, adoption can be painful for everybody. How many employees did you have at the time that you or roughly that you was it 10, 15, 20? Because the more you had, like this company that you're talking about, that's gonna be painful, and you and I both know that, right? Because once people are used to doing it a certain way, like Trent, no one wants to change in life. Were you guys,
It's yeah,
was it
it's hard
painful
to
for
turn
you
that
too?
ship. We have probably had about we had over 40 employees when we made the
Oof.
switch. Really needed about 10 key users.
Okay.
But, I always remained a sort of a super user and still had to troubleshoot, so it wasn't fully even delegated when it was in full use.
Yeah, you were the champion, so to speak, and it helps when the founder, president, owner is the champion, because you can, like a monarchy, just call the shots as you go, and this is the way it's going to be. Whereas I think when it's implemented at large scales with bigger companies, you got a department head, and you got that one guy who's spearheading it, and it's like the other people are like, "You aren't going to tell me what to do in our department," and yeah, it can be painful.
Yeah. I would say a big pain point too is just recognizing that to get everything promised from a software system, it creates transactions, and those transactions have to get layered on either in addition to someone
Yes,
else's work, or you have to add people.
yes.
Obviously, ownership is going to want to layer it on. And then, operations teams are usually burning the candle. They're usually using all their bandwidth. And then to get handed these transactions that are valuable, but someone has to do those transactions correctly for them to be valuable. So
I
it
don't
can be
think
an up.
anybody's ever brought that up before, and you did a good job of describing. I like how you said it's like layers because everything's really being doubled entried for a while because you keep using the old system and the new system, run them in tandem to make sure everything's aligning. And like you said, then there's feature creep, right? Everybody at different department. Well, can we do this and can we do that? And how long did it take you guys to get that fully up and running and feeling like okay, we've somewhat arrived here? I'm guessing in 1 to 3 years.
Exactly. It was about 2 years, and even at that point, we were pretty steady state, but we even learned some painful lessons about how the software interacts with our accounting software, which was QuickBooks. We weren't using a fully integrated system. So we had inventory software, we had an app in the middle, an API in the middle that talked to QuickBooks, and, there were some painful accounting reconciles that we had to do where phantom inventory transactions are getting sent and creating transactions on your balance sheet and
Yep.
all sorts of stuff. So,
Yeah, you're auditing just constantly. Did you build any other middleware besides that API?
no, honestly, aside from those pieces, we started running a lot of the business on Google Apps, Google Docs, Google Sheets. Just I personally thought they were more streamlined than the Microsoft environment. So
Mhm.
between those tools, we kind of had everything we needed.
The dust has settled a little bit. Are there still any, before I move on, I'll just ask one more on that. Is there still, any, places where they feel disconnected?
I mean, really, the continuing to monitor the accounting software, has really been the biggest point of maintenance. Other than that, once your team is familiar with the parts of the software they need to know,
Mhm.
they tend to not explore too much. Once they know what they have to, they get really good at that, and you just kind of have to make sure that they all have what they need.
Yeah. What type of reporting, do you find in running the business, do you find, is critical for you? I mean, I would assume some accounting, right? You got some, but what kind of reports, do you lean on in your environment for what you guys do?
Yeah, for sure the financial reports, but as it relates to the ERP, we saw much better reporting and visibility once we started moving to a month end close.
Mm,
Early in the business, we would maybe only run one or two, like an end of year COGS adjustment, and end of year inventory, but we weren't really getting good financial information to make decisions about the business. So once we started cycle counting and doing physical counts on our inventory at the end of every month, got much better visibility about our business.
that's awesome, yeah, and then so you're basically kind of doing a manual audit, so to speak, keeping the
That's
numbers
right.
in check, so to speak, yeah. So, moving on, what part of your business energizes you right now? What are you excited about?
Well, we've gone through a lot of change. So Bakeworks about a year ago, we stopped operating. So I'm on a journey as someone who was in the business for 20 years, just processing that and going into my next thing. So now I consult. So I consult on operations, product development, and business development for manufacturers around the country, and just really enjoying sort of getting paid for clarity and perspective
Mhm.
and things that are easy for me because I learned all the painful lessons. Now I get to share that so other people don't have the same mistakes. So it's honestly a lot of fun
What are
to
the
be in
common
this.
denominators when you're walking into all these different places? What are some of the, speaking from a high level, common operational challenges you see?
Well, the thing I noticed right away is that the questions really haven't changed, and everybody has very similar pain points and growing pains. So literally walking into a warehouse with no storage plan, no raw material codes that are discrete to each item, where there's room for people to misinterpret what should go in a batch of food because it looks very similar. It all feels like low hanging fruit, and the limiter is bandwidth and basically prioritizing and deciding which problem to solve first, but knowing that the answers are there. But it's all the same, at a wide range of enterprise sizes. The biggest companies have a lot of the same issues as the small companies. And
Yeah,
I think when we were smaller, we thought when we get bigger, we won't have this issue anymore, but it's the same
compounded,
stuff.
didn't it? Yeah, just
Yeah.
compounded. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? That the patterns underneath, all these businesses are surprisingly similar at the end of the day. I like the way you put that too. The questions haven't changed, and it's so true. I find I ask a lot of the same question of the show. They all revolve around the same thing, right? And it's everything an ERP system, MRP touches, right? It's the inventory, it's the accounting, it's these siloed. I think you and I might have talked when we talked about being on the show about siloed information. And do you see that a lot? Siloed information? Is that
Yeah, it's a
the
huge
gist of
risk
it?
point. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm working with a client now who a lot of their equipment, we call it tribal knowledge. A lot of that knowledge was all contained in one person who's no longer involved with the company. And so the company has to relearn that and try to document it this time and reinvent the wheel a little bit. That's a
Hmm.
huge risk.
When you go into a company and you're consulting on operations and whether it's ERP systems or inventory accounting, where do you start? What type of questions are you asking in the beginning?
I mean, number one, and it's not like the most inventive question in the world, but I just say like two main questions. What's keeping you up at night?
Mm,
And if you could solve one problem right now and wave a wand, what would it be? And the people who've been there typically aren't too far off of what should be solved when they answer those questions. As operators, we feel the business quite in depth, and when you meet other operations people, doesn't matter kind of what industry you're across. I would say that the language is similar, and you recognize very quickly when someone has experienced operational pain points. So
mhm.
those are kind of my two questions I lead with, and it's very easy to kind of go from there and based off what you're hearing.
So then when you see the first couple issues that stand out the most to you, whether it's inventory counting or reporting or barcoding or whatever, you said bandwidth tends to be a big issue with people. How do you get them to make that a priority? What's that sound like in that conversation?
Yeah. Well, the thing that we try to get across is that there are always going to be, not always, but usually more problems to solve than you have time to solve. So it's never the case that you can't just prioritize in order. Like there is an exercise I do where I just say, you just start talking tell me all the problems in your business. It could be 100. And then the next step is we just go through and rank them. It's a very basic linear sort of process, but whatever goes up to those, top 5 or 10 or even the top 1, you can put another layer on that of saying, okay, 80/20 rule, which of these problems when you solve them is going to have the biggest impact on either increasing profitability and revenue or decreasing waste, depending on the priorities of the business. That the whole prioritization conversation is really downstream of wants and needs and goals and missions and core values. So usually people don't know to start there. So we go through the pain points exercise and then we say, well, how do
For
we
you.
know how to prioritize if we don't know what you're trying to get after? And
That's
there's a little bit of an education piece there a lot of
that's
times.
so interesting. Yeah, you're going all the way downstream to start there to get to the back to the beginning. That's so interesting. So, what percentage would you say, even if you had to guess roughly, like of those operational pain points, does software solve, or software is probably the solution for, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let's say, and I guess maybe I'm not if I say it this way. They're using Excel. They probably need to go to an ERP system. We'll go back to what happened to you guys. That's an example, right? That solved some pain points. But I know it's not always software. Like sometimes it's literally moving the assembly line or a machine over here that's closer to something else. And I know there's other, physical issues, but what percentage would you say are software and non-software in
Mm,
terms of business systems to
boy, I have
really,
to
when it
think
when it
about
comes to
that
pain
one.
points, you're like, yeah, we need to do something
I would
about
say that the majority of the time, problems are the biggest consequential problems are first problems of leadership,
mm,
not software.
mm-hmm,
I've seen situations where lots of money gets spent and there doesn't seem to be someone directing, so where those resources are placed or that those resources are placed with people who don't have good direction from leadership. So that's where my mind goes first on your question.
mm-hmm.
But assuming there's a general basis of know-how in how to operate a business at the very fundamental level, software can be a total game changer.
Mhm.
But it's a game changer in setting the stage for growing the company because the company is already where it's at with the tools it
Mhm.
has, but we're not trying to stay where we're at. We're trying to grow at an exciting rate.
Right. Yeah. Well, when they bring in a consultant, I mean, they're looking for, a lot of things, right? I mean, is it pain that brings them to call you? Is it growth? Is it why are they reaching out to have a consultant come in and have them sit down and ask all these questions?
Yeah, a lot of times something's on fire.
Okay.
And so that's
Yep.
why I might get all of my consulting has been word of mouth. And it's usually been someone remembered, like, I think Zach's available. I think he would be great to help you with this. And then we talk and we get into a
Mhm.
consulting relationship. So, it can be something's on fire or you have someone who hasn't launched their project yet, but they're planners and they're methodical and they're well resourced and they're trying to put the right thing together so nothing ever catches on fire. So those are
Is that
probably
is
the two
that your
big.
favorite? That's your favorite scenario? Not you don't wanna be a firefighter.
You would probably think so, but it is fun to put out fires if you know how to do it, I would say.
Mm.
It can
Mm.
be really you kind of feel, a little heroic coming in and being like, "This problem feels big to you, but I've dealt with this before and I can help you build tools that make it a lot smaller than it is." That's very
Mhm. Very rewarding.
able to
Rewarding,
help
yeah.
out
Yeah, yeah. In your at that point too, you could potentially be saving their business from destruction or
for
a
sure.
downward spiral or whatever. When you ask that question to them about what's keeping them awake at night, are there common denominators in that situation? Like, what is keeping leadership awake at night? What the type of things you
Yeah,
hear?
that's a great question. I think a surprising number of business owners didn't get into business ownership to run a business. They did it because they had a
Mhm.
passion and a good idea, and it had enough traction, and they were able to do just enough with it to get it to a size where it was casting off profits and maybe become a lifestyle business, but then they get underwater because they're not operators. And a surprising example of that would be how many business owners don't really understand accounting. They're sort of afraid of their books. And I know what that was like. And then, I didn't go to college until 10 years into running my company. And then I took accounting classes and I was getting, A's because I was like, this all instantly applies.
Right,
This is what
right,
I've been missing.
right.
So when they don't speak the language of accounting and it's really the fundamental, it is the basis of business. It's creates a lot of uncertainty about the future, and that's really uncertainty is really what I think keeps a lot of business owners up.
Mhm, mhm. So, I've read or before there's 2 types of entrepreneurs. You got the builders and you got the managers, and the builders typically are the guys that you described, right? People like me too, I mean, we're just being like love those beginning stages, but then once it you got employees and accounting and inventory, it's kinda like it gets sort of boring, but you're sort of stuck in the cycle and you kinda have to go through the motions and do it. And then there's the guys who tend to be good people to come in and buy an existing business because they love taking something that's got I guess it needs help, and they just come in and operations. I've just
Optimize.
heard there's 2 types of different entrepreneurs, and sounds like you work with both. So what are some of the reports you see that people rely on? I would assume it's similar to you, but, like, just trying to get at understanding from that high level, since we talk to a lot of C-level executives, what are the things that they're leaning on to run their businesses? Is it and do you think custom reporting helps in any way, or do you think, general reporting's good? Is just kinda take your take on reporting.
Yeah, I would say that for in most cases, I'm a big fan of general reporting and using existing reports.
Mhm.
I've found that the less you try to customize, especially software, to how you run your business right now, the less opportunity there is for bugs versus expanding your view of how you could run your business and using the software tool as intended with the reports it provides, if possible. Like that's try to do that as much as possible. And then if you really can't get reporting you need, then think about customization. But usually the reporting, the big ones are forecasting. We want to be seeing our order file, our sales forecast. Everything in business starts from sales. If you don't have sales, you don't have operations. So the more visibility you have out on likely sales and confirmed sales is number one for me. And then translating that into financial information, cash flow forecasts, and then, your monthly P&L and balance sheet reporting. But yeah, cash flow and sales forecasts, those are probably my two favorite.
It's interesting you say that because I interviewed a guy a few weeks back, and a guy also like you run he was running a business, and he said that his number one his wish list for a dashboard, and he wishes he had one, he didn't have one, would be his sales. He'd want a block for sales and a CRM to kind of be able to guide his salespeople some high level information there. And he said that with that would be the number one thing in his mind too. So it's interesting you say that. That's not something you often hear. No, it might be a little. You've been in more of that very high level position being the owner operator. But it is interesting when you talk to people that are a little biased by their title, right, or their role. Like I can imagine a CFO saying, "Oh, I don't know, I'm going to look at this," right? Like everybody's got their. So I imagine you're speaking from the very, very highest level, correct?
I would say that's correct. And I'm definitely a manager style owner.
Mm-hmm.
I love to plan. I lean less on the visionary. I have to kind of
Mm,
work at the visionary side of leadership, and it's good and necessary. But as a manager, you're a planner, and when the more visibility you have into the future of what's likely, the more you can start making the right bets.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what does a good day operationally look like for a business? I know that's a tough question in some respects, but just curious how you would answer that. What does
Yeah,
smooth
I
look
mean,
like, right? When you
yeah,
got that business humming, it's firing on all cylinders and it's running like a race car and everybody's just cheering all the time, like operationally, like, do you ever arrive at that?
I think you do. You know when it happens because it's not every day. And it's like a small fraction of the days where you feel like, wow, this was one of the days where it feels great to be an operator and an owner. But most of the days, something's on fire. And it's like a muscle. You build a tolerance to crisis and you just get used to dealing with crisis. So a great day is when the customer's happy and your staff is happy and there's money left over in the P&L. to
Mm.
take a distribution. Doesn't get much better than that.
Amen, all caps, right? Exclamation mark. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's really well put. I like how you've been saying things too. You kinda like, like you just said tolerance for crisis your tolerance level for crisis, and, like, you have all these little cool one-liners
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
Elon calls it chewing glass and staring into the abyss. That's one of my favorite
I've not heard that one
descriptions
either.
of pretty cool.
That's awesome. You must live in the South because that sounds like, something I'd hear from people in South or Texas or something. That's awesome. You don't happen to be Texan or anything, are you? Or the
No, I was born and raised in Washington State here. Yeah,
Okay, maybe they've got a lot of those types of one-liners out there too.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you pulling back the curtain today. This has been really good. I wish I wish we could almost take like another half hour to just literally have you just talk because I bet you could lead a seminar on this and good consultant can, right? At the end of the day, you got to stand up in front of a group of people a lot and basically talk through all these things from every vantage point. And, your audience, when you're in those situations, I manage is very broad, right? You got every department head sometimes, and here you are trying to speak their language. Man, it's got to be challenging. So, if you had some advice for a consultant that does what you do, what would or is aspiring to do what you do? They come out of a successful business and they kind of have this presidential understanding of things, what would you tell them? What would you give them to say, "Yeah, here's what I would do if you wanna go into doing what I'm doing now?"
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't say anything that millions of people haven't said before me, but it's all relationship and it's all trust. And you're pretty much in the early phases. Just plan on giving everything away, and don't hold back. Don't have a scarcity mentality that you need to hold any wisdom or knowledge back, because it's a bottomless well of need. And then when people encounter people who are generous with what they know and just share it freely, it always leads to opportunity. So you just don't worry about helping people, and then the rest kind of takes care of itself, in my opinion.
Mhm, mhm. Very cool. Yeah. Thank you for, being on the show today. I appreciate you, sharing some of your wisdom and, some great nuggets here today, some really good ones.
My pleasure. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good, it's good. Appreciate you, lifting up the hood, showing us what's under the hood, what you do. Yeah, I imagine you are gonna do extremely well in your career doing what you're doing, so
I
best of luck
appreciate
to
that.
you. Best of luck to you.